That is correct, Your Honor.
All right. Anything for the record, Mr. Neal?
And just for the record, as indicated, we do request that the witnesses be sequestered, with my understanding that the other witness is not present in the courtroom at this time. Outside of that, we have nothing additional.
All right.
All rise for the jury.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Babcock, you may call your first witness.
At this time, the people would call Trooper Cody Searlet to the stand. Could you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Cody Sitterlet, the last is Sitterlet.
And could you state your profession and what agency you're employed by?
Sure, I'm a trooper with the Michigan State Police,
And how long have you been a trooper?
just under 9 years now.
And were you working in the capacity as a trooper on April 27th, 2018?
I was.
Okay. On that day, did you participate in a traffic stop at the corner of Adams Boulevard and Andre Street?
I did.
Okay. Is this an intersection here in the city of Saginaw, county of Saginaw?
It is, yes.
And at the traffic stop, did you have an opportunity to observe the occupants of the vehicle?
I did.
Okay. And how many occupants were in the vehicle?
2.
Were you able to ascertain the identities of the occupants?
I was, yes.
And how were you, and who were the individuals that you observed in the vehicle?
Mr. Dialto White and Megan Stanger.
Okay. And where were each of the occupants seated?
Mr. White was driving and Miss Stanger was in the front passenger seat.
Is Mr. White seated in the courtroom today?
He is.
And could you please point Mr. White out and describe what he's wearing?
He's gonna be in a black shirt with a gray and black tie.
Would the record reflect identification of the defendant?
It shall reflect.
And did you question any of the occupants of the vehicle?
I talked with them both briefly, yes.
Okay. And, okay. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Questions, Mr. Neal?
Good afternoon, Trooper Sitterlet.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Trooper Sitterlet, I want to direct your attention back to the day in question, April the 27th is the day you're referencing, correct?
Correct.
And you say you were involved in a traffic stop which entailed Mr. White and another individual in the vehicle?
I guess dating back to before the traffic stop, we were going to be executing a search warrant on a residence that was Mr. White's residence.
Okay. And you were executing a search warrant. Were you part of the search warrant team that day?
I was, yes.
And what time were you executing that search warrant?
It was sometime at night. I couldn't tell you the exact time off the top of my head.
Sometime at night,
Yes, sir.
early hours of the night hours or late hours, do you recall?
Again, I couldn't put a time stamp on it. It was at night though.
Okay. You went to execute a search warrant. Was it you and other officers?
Yes, there's several of us,
How many when you say several?
upwards of 7, I believe, maybe 10 at the most.
And you were going to exit, at the time you went to execute that search warrant, Mr. White was not home, was
We later discovered that he was not home. It wasn't known at the time we went to execute the search warrant.
he? At some point in time, you and the other officers did arrive to his house, though, correct?
Correct.
And when you arrived to his house, nobody was there, correct?
We didn't have the opportunity to figure that out at that time, given the circumstances that the officer in charge had observed Mr. White drive past us.
Okay. Were you present when Mr. White drove past you?
I was, yes.
What kind of vehicle was Mr. White driving?
Some type of sedan.
Recall the color?
Not off the top of my head, no, sir.
Inside of that search warrant, you were searching his home for other items, correct?
Your Honor, objection to relevance on this line of questioning.
What's the relevance?
The relevance leads to the basis for the stop and the basis for why they were even at his house that day.
I'll sustain the objection.
Thank you. Now, when you observed Mr. White driving by, you then subsequently made a traffic stop on him, correct?
Yes,
He was driving the vehicle that you stopped him in, correct?
correct.
And the vehicle in which he was driving that day was also included in the search warrant to be searched as well, correct?
And I didn't have any knowledge of whether or not the vehicle was included in the search warrant or not.
Okay. When you then came into contact with Mr. White, he was in a vehicle with another individual,
Correct.
and subsequently, after coming into contact with him, you had some conversation with Mr. White, correct?
Correct.
You also had some conversation with the other occupant of that vehicle, didn't you?
Ms. Stanger, correct.
Yes. And in having any conversations with Mr. White, what did Mr. White say to you?
I don't recall much of Mr. White's conversation that we had.
Now, at some point in time, did you return back to Mr. White's residence?
We did, yes.
And the place that you made the traffic stop, how far was that from his residence?
Just under 2 blocks to my recollection.
Did you take Mr. White back to his residence that day?
Yes, I did.
He didn't drive his vehicle back to his residence though, did he?
Not to my recollection, no.
Did you take it back to his residence?
Yes, I believe so.
So after making contact with Mr. White, you got him and the occupants out of his car,
Correct.
and then you drove his car back to his residence.
Per his request, yes.
Why did you drive his car back to his residence?
That way we didn't have to tow the vehicle.
Is it customary that you would drive a person's car back to a location?
Objection to relevance on this.
It's very relevant.
What's the relevance?
The relevancy, Your Honor, is that, hey, they took Mr. White's car back to his home in relation to the search warrant.
I'll allow a little bit of leeway, Mr. Neal, but I'm not quite sure where we're going with this.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Now, after taking his vehicle back to his home, wasn't there a search conducted on his vehicle?
I can't testify to that. I wasn't part of the search in his vehicle.
Okay. Prior to, did you drive Mr. White back to his house, or you took his car back to his house?
I took his car back to his house, I believe.
So at some point in time, you had him and the occupant get out of the vehicle, correct?
The other occupant of the vehicle?
Yes.
Yes.
And when you removed both of those individuals from the vehicle, did you subsequently pat Mr. White down?
I don't recall.
Is it customarily that you would pat someone down for your own safety?
Most of the time I asked for consent to search a person, yes.
Okay. Did you do that with Mr. White?
I don't recall.
Do you recall, were you on that traffic stop alone, or were you with another officer?
I was with another officer.
Do you recall Mr. White being patted down by the other officer?
No, I do not.
Did you pat Ms. Stringer down?
No, I did not.
Do you recall if she was patted down by any other officer?
I do not recall. I had a female officer working with me that day, so she would have taken over that part of the traffic stop.
So after getting Mr. White and these occupants out of the vehicle, excuse me, you can't recall if you did a search of his person, correct?
Correct.
At no point in time did you or any other officers find any drugs on Mr. White? Did you?
Objection foundation. There's 2 other officers.
If he knows, he can answer the question.
Not to my knowledge, no.
At no point in time did you or any other officers find any drugs on the passenger of that vehicle, did you?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And you don't recall any statements made by Mr. White, do you?
Not to my recollection, no.
And outside of your initial conversation with Ms. Stinger that night, you haven't had any other conversations with her, have you?
Based on that night alone, I do not, I take that back. I have.
You have?
Yes, I ran into her at court one time up in circuit court.
Related to this case?
No,
Or a separate matter?
I was on a separate matter and she was on a separate matter and she recognized me and I didn't even recognize her at the time.
Okay. What did you say to her in that interaction?
It was brief. It was a hello and goodbye. It wasn't anything standing and I didn't gather much more information than that.
Okay. Did you prepare a report of your interaction with Mr. White, Ms. Stinger from that night?
I had Trooper Neal note that in his report.
Okay. But did you prepare a report?
I prepared a separate report
You
based
prepared,
on the warrants that Ms. Stinger had for her.
Ms. Stinger had warrants when you came into contact with her?
Correct.
So she was taken into custody that evening?
Correct.
And you prepared a report related to her warrants?
Correct. And that was it.
Nothing related to the traffic stop?
No, sir.
Did you provide that report to the prosecutor?
The warrant report?
The report that you prepared that evening?
No, I did not. It was a warrant report and it was just based off the traffic stop in this case and didn't have anything else standing with it.
All right. So aside from that night, the only contact that you've had with Mrs. Stinger was at the stop and at circuit court
Correct.
sometime thereafter.
Correct.
No further questions of this officer, Your Honor.
Anything else, Mr. Babcock?
No further questions of this witness, Your Honor.
You may step down. Are your next witness, Mr. Babcock?
Yes, Your Honor. The people will now call Megan Renee Stinger to the stand. Ma'am, if you can approach her, she's going to do an oath and then you'll be taking the seat. Ma'am, could you please state your full name for the record and spell your last name as well?
Megan Renee Stinger, Stenger.
Let me stop you, Ms. Stinger. I'm gonna need you to pull right up to the microphone and speak loud into it, okay? Thank you. Continue.
Ma'am, do you know D'Alto White?
I do.
Okay. Is he in the courtroom here today?
Yes, he is.
Could you briefly describe where he's at and what he's wearing?
He's to my right and to your left in the furthest seat at that table.
Okay. And can you, what's he wearing, if you can describe it generally?
A black dress shirt.
If the records should reflect the identification of the defendant.
It shall reflect.
Do you recall a traffic stop that occurred in which you were a passenger in a vehicle that Mr. White was driving?
I do.
And With regards to this traffic stop, do you recall when the traffic stop occurred approximately?
Where it occurred,
When?
when,
Yeah, if you
Like-
recall.
it was late at night, like in April sometime.
Okay, do you know what year it was? Was it? You recall at this point?
I can't recall the year, to be,
Oh, Okay.
to be honest.
Okay. And did this traffic stop occur here in Saginaw County?
Yes,
Okay. Was the officers that pulled over you the vehicle Michigan State Police, if you know?
yes,
And did you have any interaction with any of the state police officers?
yeah, quite a few of them, actually.
Okay. Do you recognize any of those officers here in the courtroom today?
Yes,
And who do you recognize?
he is right there in front of me.
And could you describe where this officer seated in relation to me?
To your right,
Okay, he's at the table, is that what you're saying?
yes,
And what's he wearing?
blue dress shirt with a black jacket.
The record should reflect he's identified Trooper Silhouette.
Okay, he identified himself, but that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. And did you, okay, and during the course of the traffic stop, did you speak to Trooper Silhouette at any point?
Yes,
Okay. How many times have you been in Mr. White's vehicle when the state police had pulled over that vehicle?
just that one time.
Okay. And could you explain to the jury, why were you in Mr. White's car that day?
Because he came to my house and picked me up. And we were supposed to be going back to his house,
Okay. And where were you living at the time?
my parents' house in Rhodes, in Benton County, in Rhodes.
And what was your understanding, what was the purpose of going back to Mr. White's house?
Objection, Your Honor, action answer.
Pardon?
Action answer.
I don't think it was asked yet why they were going back there. He said, where were you going? But not why were you going?
Thank you.
Overrule the objection. Proceed.
And why were you going back to Mr. White's house?
To- to perform sexual things for exchange for drugs.
Back when you were having at the time of this traffic stop, did you have any sort of drug addiction?
Yes,
And so the purpose of this transfer of this drive was so you could go back to his place and have exchange sex for drugs?
yes,
And at some point in time, on the way to his residence, there was a traffic stop, correct?
yes,
Therefore, you didn't make it to his residence that day, correct?
correct.
I have nothing further with this witness.
All right, questions, Mr. Neal?
Thank you.
Stagger, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Want to direct your attention back to the day in April that you indicated that you were with Mr. White. Recall that day?
I do.
And on the day that you were Mr. White on this particular day back in April, you had in fact, you've known Mr. White for some time, isn't that true?
That's true.
And you had a friendship or relationship with Mr. White of some sort?
Of some sort. I guess you couldn't really call it a friendship, but
To use your word, as you testified previously, he was an acquaintance, correct?
yes,
Safe to say you had a relationship with, for say, 2 years or so with Mr. White, correct?
correct.
And you'd been to his house on many different occasions, correct?
Many, yes,
And in fact, you, in fact, used to live at his house at one point in time.
not really lived. I didn't even unpack any of my stuff. I was there for like a week, not even.
For a week. You stay there for a week,
Maybe if a week, yeah.
more like a month?
No.
And while you were there, it's no secret that you did drugs while you were there too, correct?
Correct,
You and other individuals.
correct.
So you were there freely and voluntarily when you did stay there, correct?
Correct.
And how many times had you been there previously?
You're supposed to expect me to remember every single time I've been to his house.
Pardon?
I'm supposed to remember every time I've been to his house.
Yes,
That's absurd, but okay, probably like 25 times.
25 times?
I have no idea
All right.
whatsoever. My recollection of the previous 5 years of my life are really clouded.
Really
So I
caught it?
could not tell you how many times exactly I have been to his house. I couldn't, but a lot, yeah.
Okay. You recall having a conversation with the officers prior to this traffic stop or after this traffic stop?
Yep.
You remember telling the officers you've been to his house maybe 40 times in the past?
I don't remember telling them that, but that wouldn't surprise me if I said that because I have been there a lot.
Okay. You remember testifying previously that you've been to his house 20 to 30 times in the past?
I don't know what exactly the amount of times I've been there matters. I guess I don't understand how many times I've been to his house affects the night that we got pulled over. Or what, nothing changed from that night to any other times I've been there. Nothing was different. It was always the same thing. There's no new scenarios, no new things that happened. Repeatedly same thing, sex, drugs, sex.
Let me ask you this. You wouldn't disagree that you did testify previously at another hearing. You've been there between 20 to 30 times.
I told you, I cannot recall the amount of times. I just don't get why that matters.
Objection asked and answered, and again, I don't know where he's going with this.
Sustain the objection.
Thank you. Now, on this particular day, isn't it true that you called Mr. White to come and pick you up?
I may have, I may not have.
You don't recall?
I just told you I don't recall.
So if you called him to come and pick you up, you don't even recall the substance of the conversation, do you?
How am I supposed to remember a conversation that happened for almost probably like 4 years ago now? When I've had lots of conversations with him and I've had lots of conversations with other people. And I already told you, because of my drug addiction, my head is clouded from back then.
Okay, that's fine. That's fair. Safe to say you had an addiction back then, correct?
I mean, I'm always going to have an addiction, yes.
All right, that's fair. So it's safe to say that you don't recall any discussion between you and him about exchanging drugs for sex on this day, do you?
But when he messages me and tells me, hey, I got basketballs, I know what that was. It's crack. And it's also, hey, I also don't have any money. He says, you don't ever need money. You know that. That's what it always was. That's how it always the conversation was. He'd say, I got basketballs. I say, I don't have any money, but you know, you don't need money.
You don't recall him making those statements on this particular day, do you?
It was always the same statements, but no, on that particular day, I can't recall that he said those exact words, but can you tell me if he said those exact words? Do you have
No.
phone records? Do you have text messages? Do you have any of that? Because if you can't even tell me that I said that, or he said that, then how am I supposed to tell you if I said that or he said that?
Thank you. Do you have any text messages of the conversation with
I do
Mr. White?
not.
Pardon?
I do not. I've had 3 different phones since then.
And
I'm
you-
sure they're around. I'm sure you could get them.
But you don't have them with you, do you?
I don't even have a phone.
So the only thing that we're supposed to assume is that because you said it, he said something about exchanging sex for drugs, right?
We literally had the same things happen every time we hung out. It was the same thing.
Now, on this particular day, you had contact with the trooper, as you indicated, correct?
Correct.
That was back in April of 2018, correct?
Correct.
On that traffic stop, did you ever say anything about exchanging sex for drugs to this trooper?
Mm. Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, not until after he after we had sat and talked, not from the initial stop. No, I didn't say nothing about it.
Okay.
But after I sat there for like 3 hours and we talked about everything and yeah, things eventually got brought to surface.
What'd you say to this trooper?
How am I supposed to remember my exact words? If I tell you what I said and it's wrong, then I'm just getting myself in trouble because I don't know what I said. I cannot remember 4 years ago. Pardon me if that's so wrong, but please enlighten me what I could have said. Or maybe what you think I said, or what he told you I said. Please tell me, because I'd love to know what I said 4 years ago on that day at that time.
But you did talk to that trooper.
I definitely talked to that
On the
trooper,
night of
yes.
the traffic stop, correct?
Yeah, I did.
You can't recall anything you
I
said.
can't recall word for word what I said. No, I cannot.
Now, neither you or Mr. White were arrested that, or you were arrested that evening, correct?
I wasn't arrested.
You were let go.
Yeah, my mom came and paid my bond.
So you were arrested. You were detained, correct?
Not really. I was there on my own free will talking, waiting for my mother to come pay my,
You couldn't leave until your mother paid your bond, correct?
I mean, I probably could have left, but I probably would have got, arrested.
Okay.
But no, I was not arrested. I was not in handcuffs. I was not being held against my will. I was sitting there willingly having a conversation with that cop about everything that had been going on in my life at that point in time.
A lot going on in your life.
A lot going on. There still is a lot going on.
You then were released after your mother paid your bond?
Yeah.
Okay. And after that, you didn't have any contact with any of that trooper or any other troopers for significant amount of times regarding the night of the stop, did you?
No.
In fact, the next time you had a conversation with any trooper, whether this trooper or Trooper Neal, you recall Trooper Neal?
Is there a question there?
Do you recall having a conversation on October the 30th of 2019 with Trooper Neal?
I don't even know what I was in, probably in jail.
The next time, in fact, you did have a conversation with any troopers was October the
When I
30th,
was in jail.
2019.
Yeah.
You were in jail.
I was in jail.
A year and a half later, after this traffic stop, correct?
Mhm.
And Trooper Neal came to talk with you while you were in jail.
Yeah.
Objections to relevance, where we're going with this.
What's the relevance? Relevance, Your Honor, is going right into our statement.
Well, just ask her about her statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. On that day, Trooper Neal came to talk with you, and he was present with another officer, correct?
Yeah.
Not this officer.
No.
On that day, you recall making a statement October the 19th of 2019 that you used crack and heroin?
Yeah, those are the two drugs I've done.
On that day, October 30th, 2019, you recall telling Trooper Neal you and Mr. White were in fact going to the casino.
Yeah, that's what I said when they pulled us over, is that's where we were going, because I wasn't telling them the truth. Obviously, I wasn't ready to tell them the truth at that point, and why would he want me to tell them the truth? So yeah, we lied.
So you weren't telling them the truth back in April of 2018?
About going to the casino? No, I was not telling the truth about that. That was already discussed the last time I sat in front of you and had the same exact conversation. I told you the same exact thing.
And you were not telling the truth again in October of 2019.
They asked me and I said, yes, we were going to the casino. And they said, and I told them that I had lied about that because they brought it up, how I stated that when I first got up that night when we got pulled over, they brought up how I said we were going to the casino. And I said, yes, and I had lied about that because we obviously were not going to the casino.
In fact, in that same interview in October 2019, didn't you tell Trooper Neal that you and Mr. White had a sexual relationship?
What would you call it? I just don't understand how is that relevant to any of this? You already know there was obviously a sexual relationship there, obviously. I mean, what else would you call it?
Also on that same day, October of 2019, didn't you also tell Trooper Neal you never took drugs or you never exchanged drugs for sex from Mr. White?
I never said that.
So if Trooper Neal wrote that in his report, he'd be lying?
I never.
Objection foundation.
It's a statement made by her, Your Honor.
She's already denied making a statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Further, on that same day, with the conversation with Trooper Neal in October of 2019, do you recall making a statement that you would regularly make money and you would give the money to Mr. White for drugs?
Yeah, I did say that because that is very true.
You had money.
Sometimes I had money, yes, and I would give it to him for drugs. Or he would say, come on, make me some money.
You also recall on that same day, October 2019, that you told Trooper Neal you didn't have any specific plans to have sex with Mr. White that night.
How is it a specific plan? It's just something that happens. I don't understand where the question is in this.
You
Is
don't-
there a question?
You don't deny making that statement though, do you?
I don't know what you're talking about, for one. How is there a specific plan? It happened. It's simple. It's drugs and then sex. What science is there to that? It's that simple. It's that simple. A man who's way older than me took the fact that I'm an addict, used it against me, manipulated my head into telling me that basically this is what you have to do, and you have to do it because you want these drugs. But then would tell me, I don't know why you do that shit. It's bad for you anyways. But then turn around and would try to give me the dope, knowing that I'm a drug addict. I don't know why he couldn't find a girlfriend
Okay.
his own age. No, let's just use all these girls so I can get what I want out of them because I know they need what I have.
All right, let me ask you
Right?
another question then. That was the second interview or contact that you had with MSP, correct? Yes,
Sure.
which occurred a year and a half after the initial contact.
Okay. Yeah. A year and a half later.
You also had a third contact with Trooper Neal on or about November the 6th
Yeah. When I
of
was in jail.
2019. Again, in jail.
Again, in jail. Yeah.
At that time, Trooper Neal came to visit you. He was alone, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. And I talked to him more than.
Objection to relevance again, Your Honor.
What's the relevance?
The relevance here is we're establishing who was present during the times that she had contact with any officers from MSP.
Did it have anything to do with tonight in question, Mr. Neal?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I'll allow a little bit of leeway if this third contact has something to do tonight in question.
Thank you.
Proceed.
Now, on this third contact, when you was having this conversation along with Trooper Neal, you recall telling Trooper Neal that you spent a lot of time there and you had lived there at one point, about a month?
I don't recall saying that a specific time frame. No, I definitely don't remember saying a specific time frame because I was never there for that long. I never even unpacked my clothes. They sat in a suitcase in a spare bedroom. So how is that living somewhere? I'd say I kept my stuff there. Living somewhere would be putting your address there. I didn't.
Again, that third contact, you were in jail again, correct?
Yeah, for violation of probation, but guess what? I'm 2-year felony probation and I'm good on all of that. No felonies on my record. I completed it golden. So the fact that I was in jail, the way you're saying that you were in jail, making it sound like it's a bad thing, you know what? I completed what I had to do. I got through that. I passed 2.5 years.
Isn't it during that third conversation with Trooper Neal in November, was the first time you made any reference of exchanging sex for drugs?
No, it's not. They've known since the initial night of the arrest that that's what was going on. It's all reported.
Isn't it true? In that third conversation with Trooper Neal in November of 2019, when he was alone, you stated to him that the first time you spoke to him, he was with another trooper
So I
that you
didn't.
didn't like.
So I didn't talk to him about my personal business in front of somebody I don't know.
Isn't it true that you told him you didn't make those statements because you didn't like the other officer?
It was
he
not about,
with?
I didn't like the officer. I didn't even know the officer. He was rude. He kept staring at me with a straight stone cold face. So no, excuse me if I don't want to talk about the fact that I used to have sex for drugs in front of somebody that I don't even know. How that matters right now, I would love to know.
Isn't it true that you told Trooper Neal that day you didn't like that officer because he was quiet and you don't like people that are quiet?
No, that's not true. I never said that. Because I'm not a quiet person. And I like when people are quiet because sometimes it's good to be quiet. But I would never say I don't like somebody because they are quiet. I would never say that. That is not my words and that's not coming out of my mouth.
Okay. May I have a moment, Jan? Yep. Now, just briefly, in your relationship with Mr. White, isn't it true that you told officers that you liked Mr. White because you liked his personality?
I mean, yeah, he's a funny person. What does that have to do with anything else, though? I don't. Me liking somebody doesn't mean that they didn't take advantage of me being in a vulnerable situation. Again, me being vulnerable, young, fresh into addiction.
So the first time you had contact with what, the MSP or officers was in April of 2018, correct?
Correct.
The next time was October 2019, correct?
Correct.
Then again in November of 2019, correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true that the officers then brought you to court in
Correct.
December 2020?
Correct.
They picked you up,
Yeah, they picked me up.
just you and one officer.
Me and an officer.
Where'd they pick you up from?
My parents' house
Where's that?
in Rhodes.
In Rose? How far was your parents' house to court?
25 minutes.
Objection.
What's the
Object to
relevance?
The relevance, Your Honor, is that she's in the car with an officer, just she and an officer for an extended amount of time. There's a lot of things that they could have discussed
But there's
during that
no,
car ride.
that's not relevant though.
I'll sustain the
I'm
objection.
sorry.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Babcock?
Yeah, to follow up, Your Honor. Okay, let's go back to April 17, 2018. You had indicated in response to questions from defense counsel, this wasn't the first time that you had gotten a ride with Mr. White, correct?
Correct.
And on these prior occasions, when you had obtained a ride from Mr. White, what was the purpose of those rides?
Pardon?
past performance to show actions in conformity.
In your honor, he opened the door to it. He got into the prior drives and prior rides.
Overrule the objection. Proceed.
What was the nature of those earlier rides? What was the purpose of those rides?
I mean, there's some, occasionally it was just like, to give me a ride to wherever. But for the most part, it was picking me up and taking me back to his house where I was gonna get what I wanted.
And what was it you were wanting?
The drugs that I needed to not be sick.
And what was Mr. White wanting?
His, his dick sucked.
So when he would give you a ride back to his house, that was, on prior occasions, that was always the outcome. Is that what you're
Oh,
saying?
yeah.
So when April 17th came around, it was the same as it had been in the past.
Can we stop? You both have gone around and
Okay.
around and
Okay.
around. I'm tired of the question.
Okay.
Anything relevant you want to ask her?
Just so you're clear, just so we're clear, at some point I'm not asking you to quote the troopers as far word for word what they said, but at some point, did you indicate that you spoke to Trooper Ciderlet and indicate why you were in that car that day?
Yeah.
And what was it generally that you said? That you-
Enough. She already answered that question. Anybody have any more pertinent questions other than the ones we already heard?
Nothing further, Your
Mr.
Honor.
Neal, pertinent?
No, yeah.
You may step down.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have no further witnesses, Your Honor.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break at this time. You go with my clerk, please.
All right. to the jury, please.
And Mr. Babcock, when we bring the jury back in, you will rest in front of them. All right, Mr. Neal. You intend to produce any witnesses?
Your Honor, may I inquire?
Yes.
Mr. White, you understand that you have a right to remain silent and not testify in this particular instance, correct? And you would acknowledge that it's my advice to you that you remain silent and not testify? Yes. Is it your intentions to remain silent and not testify in this particular matter?
I would like the jury to hear some positive information about me. I mean, everything's been twisted and blown out of proportion. And I know things about the case that everybody doesn't know.
Is it your desire to testify or not testify despite my advice that you don't have to testify?
I would like to testify.
Your Honor, we will present one witness.
All right. So when the jury comes back, you can rest, Mr. Babcock. You can call your witness at that point in time. And we'll take a short break at this time. I'd like to see counsel in chambers, please.
All right.